Great. Hi. Well, thank you to Product School for inviting me to speak and to all of you for joining today. I'd say in the midst of this global pandemic and uncertainty about the future of work, it's good that you all are thinking about this really critical role of managing product. Product management is all about making sense and managing uncertainty. As much as any of us can help elevate the craft of the larger PM community as a whole, I think it's a really worthy endeavor. So for today's agenda, I'm going to start by introducing myself, so you can learn a bit about my background and history. Then I'm going to dive right into the meat of the presentation and go through some pitfalls and learnings that you'll face as a new PM based on my own observations, as well as stories from the larger PM community and friends. And that'll pretty much be the agenda. All right. So here's what I have been up to for the last decade and a half. I started my career in tech at Google, albeit not as a product manager. Really fun experience seeing rocket ship growth from the inside and just being surrounded by a lot of really smart people. Then I went to Berkeley to get my MBA. I've always wanted to work for a game company. I'm a big fan of games. So after I graduated, I joined Zynga as a product manager and worked on a game that was in pre-production. After that, I joined a late stage startup called Smule, which was dabbling at kind of like the intersection between music, social networking, streaming technology. There I led a bunch of teams around a variety of initiatives like growth and monetization, security, infrastructure, payments, platform services. And then today I am at Dropbox as a group product manager. It's a great company that's helping to design a more enlightened way of working, and it's been a wild ride and I really still enjoy it. It's great. Okay, so before we continue, a quick disclaimer. It goes without saying that everything you're about to hear here are my personal opinions. They absolutely do not reflect any of the beliefs or practices of any of my employers, past or present. These are all just personal opinion, and they don't reflect like actual things that have happened. A lot of names and projects and stuff have been changed to preserve anonymity and things like that. All right, and then the title of this talk is I just joined and what's going on. And that's really meant to capture the feeling of uncertainty that comes with joining a new company as a product manager. That feeling is really common and perfectly normal, and there's absolutely nothing to be ashamed of. The learning objectives today really center around how to make the best use of your first 30 days on the job. I want to be really upfront about what I'm not going to talk about today. This is not going to be a list of tools that you need to get really acquainted with. It's not going to be about learning SQL queries to be able to get data fast, or a checklist of what to do on each of the first 30 days and milestones and to know if you're ahead or behind the curve. I think every company is different and there's no one size fits all approach. So this presentation is actually more of a general framework to help you avoid some of the really common pitfalls that PMs face in a not so high pressure situation. You might really identify those pitfalls really easily. It's also about going in with the right mindset so that you're really setting yourself up for success and not mortgaging your future for some early wins. And I wanted to start by laying out some core premises. These are the ground level things that I fundamentally believe about product management as a craft. And the whole presentation kind of falls apart if you also accept these things. So I just really wanted to lay the groundwork and say, look, these are the big things that you just have to believe if the rest of the presentation were to make sense. And they are, number one, that PMs are really more than just execution. It's about instincts. You're hired for sound judgment, pattern recognition. And because of that, even really veteran PMs need significant time to ramp up. PMing is really a long-term investment for any company. And so if you really want to deliver outsized value for a company, you just need time to become familiar and to be effective. And then I also believe that the first 30 days are a really critical window of time because you're able to look at the company objectively, you have fresh eyes, and what you don't want to do is squander that period of time because eventually you start getting colored and biased with what you've been hearing. So really going with an open mind. All right. So I'm going to dive right in and set the stage. So it's your first day on the job, your new adventure is beginning. You probably had a really challenging PM interview and pretty intense offer negotiation. The interviewers the whole time were trying to sell you on the job. So they painted a really rosy picture of how this company is doing really well and how you're really needed. Now, because of the pandemic, IT has mailed you your laptop. You opened it up, you set everything up. You finished your HR checklist in Workday, and you had your first one-on-one with your manager. Your manager exclaims, I have really high expectations for you. It's like, ooh, okay. And if you're lucky, these types of things are in place at your company. And the larger the company, the more support structures are going to be in place to effectively onboard you. If you join a startup, things tend to be very informal. That's a generalization, of course, but the larger the company, the more people that they're hiring on a continual basis, so they have structures in place to help you. These might include things like a ramp-up plan, an official PM boot camp, or some kind of official set of classes that you take, and often one or more new hire buddies whose job it is to pair up with you and be available for any kind of questions that you have. But depending on the company, you're also going to be feeling a variety of pressures. And that might include maybe the company has they really lack clear direction and no one really knows what they're doing, although they pretend to. You feel like everyone is quietly judging you. Like, who's this new person? And why did we hire this person? You're worried about angry first impressions. Like, what if you say something wrong and then you're forever known as that person? Or maybe you heard that this company has a fire fast culture where you have to prove yourself and the clock is ticking. And if you don't, then they're just going to fire you and hire somebody else. You know, these sound kind of crazy, but when you join a new company, you don't really know how things are. You're trying to get a lay of the land. And these types of things could be in the back of your head and sort of working against these structures and giving you a lot of anxiety. So it's no wonder that in this kind of high stress situation, people are like, oh my God, being a PM is really intimidating. So what should you do in your first 30 days? You know, to use a metaphor, I think of it as a really complex game that you're trying to figure out. You should be doing everything you can to try to figure out, one, what game am I playing? What are the rules to this game? Like, who are the pieces? How do they move? What moves are allowed? Is this a competitive game or is it a cooperative game? What's my objective here? Think about your starting position. Like, what can I actually manage, and can I move right away, or are there things blocking me? Are all the different starting positions fair and equitable? And then how do I succeed? You know, what are the winning strategies? What can I do to make sure that I am delivering the right kind of value for this company, and what are all these rules? But I think in the process of figuring out this game, it's really easy to fall into traps. And there are a lot of traps. And today I'm going to talk about three of what I think are the most common ones. What these traps are, why they exist, and how you can avoid them. And they are getting a really poor lay of the land, focusing on action instead of strategy, and lastly, ignoring your instincts. So first, getting a poor lay of the land. What is this exactly? So this would be like at the end of the 30 days, you realized you wasted time talking to all the wrong people and jumping to all the wrong conclusions, or you're not getting a full picture. The result of this is that your ability to be effective has been really impaired and you don't have access to the right resources or tools to do your job effectively. You maybe lack relationships with the real influencers in the company. You're having a really hard time getting support when new challenges arise. Your judgment might be anchored on really poor premises because you talked to one person who was really negative and like colored your entire perspective of how things should be. And then reorienting the ship is just going to take you another 30 days. You feel like you're behind. So that is a really common trap. And I want to talk a bit about what you need to do. In fact, one of the main things you should do is gather data from everybody. Don't talk, just listen. But don't take everything at face value. Don't assume that everybody else you're talking to has actually up-to-date facts or sound strategy. You have to triangulate from a lot of different sources and then figure out where the reality of the situation lies. And that is going to lead to like you having to identify who the key influencers are. And that means you probably want to actually map the org charts yourself, go through that kind of exercise so you understand how the different relationships are. You want to understand every person's actual roles and responsibilities, what it is on paper and what they're actually spending their days on. But most importantly, you want to identify who are the approvers and who are the drivers. Let me talk a bit about what those are. Approvers are those people in every team or company that people seem to look to them to make the decisions or to have the final say. These are the people who are ultimately responsible and who own the decision. And you want to identify who these people are. And then the drivers are the people who seem to always be the ones getting things done. They're the ones greasing the wheels. Seems like projects kind of get stuck and then the driver shows up and all of a sudden the project is moving forward again. Those types of people. So you want to find approvers and drivers those are the people that you actually want to spend time shadowing, have one-on-ones with them, because these people tend to have actually up-to-date information because they're a lot more well-connected. They tend to also see the details behind, the reality of what's going on. And so spend time with them, shadowing them, and understanding the mechanics of how to actually get stuff done. Secondly, you want to learn about what's canon in the company. And that means, understanding the company's key metrics. How accessible is this quantitative data? What are the company's top line KPIs? Does everyone have access or only a few people have access? Is the data generally seen as trustworthy, or are people just like, oh, they're numbers and things are broken and you can't really trust it? Learn how to pull it yourself or make friends with an analyst so that you have these things handy. You want to understand the company's slang. What are the 3-letter acronyms that you need to know? Because they are different from company to company. And if you think like MAU means monthly active users, you might be surprised you go to another company, it means something totally different, or they measure it differently. Lastly, what's the source of truth when it comes to documenting decisions? Is it Confluence? Are people recording everything in Google Docs? Is it just email? Or worst case scenario, there is no documentation. It's a lot of just verbal agreement and handshaking. And then you need to kind of get below the surface, and that means asking really provoking questions. Pretty soon, if you ask really provoking questions, you will be able to decipher between who is the kind of person who's very candid, and who's being diplomatic, who's going to give you the real dirt, and who's going to try to obfuscate things in order to get along. You'll distinguish between those two types of people, and you need them for different things as you're ramping up. It's good to understand what people really think. Why did past projects that you're hearing about really fail? What current initiatives do people believe in versus secretly don't believe in? What past employees maybe get blamed unfairly for past failures, and why? Why are they being scapegoated? What do others really think about the team that you just joined? What are people's biggest frustrations with the company, and why are people sticking around despite these frustrations? The goal here, though, is to get context so that you understand as you are building out your own personal plan, where you can play. This is not about just like gathering gossip for gossip reasons. This is about context. And so in short, what you want to do is really learn what is going on. When you sign that job offer, you had recruiters telling you a very rosy picture, but now that you're on the inside, you can find out how things really are. It might be as rosy as they said, but it might not be. And there may be a lot of problems that are now your problems. So you need to figure this out very, very quickly. The second trap, focusing on action instead of strategy. So let me talk a bit about what this is. So this is where a new PM, you just joined, and the new PM feels like, I need to prove myself immediately. So then they work on a bunch of little meaningless projects their first 30 days that don't really drive a lot of value, but make it feel like you're doing a lot of work. And why does this happen? Well, it's not always the PM's fault. I mean, sometimes the environment creates this kind of feeling. Maybe managers are setting the wrong expectations, hiring managers, by saying stuff like, I want you to hit the ground running, or I want you to be action oriented. Maybe the new PM feels pressure to ship something as soon as possible to get a quote, quick win. Or maybe the new PM incorrectly assumes that somehow like rolling up the sleeves to do small tactical work is high leverage. Like, I'm going to run an A/B test and test a button color or something. Or maybe the new PM thinks, I don't know anything yet. The strategy will come later once I'm wrapped up. I just need to do something. But the result of that is often that the PM is going to spend a lot of cycles after the first 30 days trying to justify what they just did the first 30 days, justifying all their present and future projects because they didn't spend that first 30 days actually creating a good foundation for themselves. So you need to connect your mandate, your personal PM mandate, the reason you were hired, back to the company strategy. If you're able to do that effectively and get aligned with all the different stakeholders, the rest of your job becomes just a really cool prioritization exercise where you're saying, this thing's high value, this thing's not, this is costly, this isn't, and here's how I'm going to run my roadmap. But you really need to make sure that what you're doing is in service to what the company is trying to do and what that means. Your company strategy determines the team strategy, which in turn determines your mandate. All right. Hopefully, it means that your company has a clear and coherent strategy that's not just a slogan, but actually like hey, here's how we win, and here are our competitors, and this is why we think we can win, and here are the risks. The company is leveraging both you and the team to achieve its goals. So by taking the time to understand how the pieces fit together, it's gonna just basically set you up for a lot more success than if you were to just spend this time, I don't know, digging into an A/B test that changes like a user flow or something. So understanding your starting position. So back to that, like the game analogy, where are you starting? How far are you from your goal? So it's really important to learn how value is actually being created within the company. So your team's mission, and why is the company actually funding your team? What kind of value is the company expecting from this team? How is success actually being measured for this team? Is it all qualitative? Is it quantitative? What kind of value is being created? Is your team driving monetization? Is it driving customer delight? Is it cost savings? Or is there some kind of like expectation that the things you do don't actually drive those things, but open up additional market opportunity so that other teams can drive those things? Knowing what your team is actually expected to do gives you a sense of where you're actually starting so that you can make the right moves. Also, do all the dots actually connect logically when you're trying to connect your mission back to the company mission? I mean, are there significant mental gymnastics that are required to connect all these dots? And are these risks actually well understood by leadership? If it feels weird, you might have to actually spend some cycles reconnecting everything versus just doing what you were told when you were hired. And it's worth taking the effort to do that because it's going to set you up for better success after your 30 days. You also want to inventory your levers. So what is a lever or lever? Levers are actions that you can consistently and reliably take to impact your outcomes. So do you actually have direct levers that you can pull, or are they only indirect? Like you can only set things in motion and hope for the best and rely on others to actually pull those levers. Knowing which options you have are really important for when you plan your actions. What is the operating model that your team actually uses to prioritize work and understand what to be worked on? How is execution managed and who blocks who? How much of your mandate is tied to the mandate of others? These are all parts of strategy and tactics that should be figured out now in the first 30 days, and that will give you a much better lay of the land. And then you also want to test for common understanding as you are doing these explorations into strategy. Talk to the people about these topics, people who have been around for a while. Do they actually know what they're doing, and do they actually know why they're doing it? Can they repeat back to you and convince you that the things they are doing are meaningful? Can they articulate the company strategy, and can they tie their work back to the company strategy? Are people generally around you actually thinking for themselves, or are they just following some kind of bigger mandate that they don't really believe in? As you investigate, oftentimes you talk to people, they're like, well, I don't know, I've been doing X, Y, Z. Don't settle for that. I think it's really important to get a satisfying answer to that problem because that is now your problem. So it'll be up to you to push your team and peers to coalesce around an answer, particularly around topics like value creation. This may mean that instead of just working with your peers or your manager, you actually have to push upwards to like directors and vice VPs and maybe even the CEO at a smaller company to like get those answers. Because the bottoms of work that you will be doing and crafting need to be reconciled with top-down direction. They cannot exist in isolation. And that always then brings up the question of what if I just joined a company that doesn't have a clear top-down strategy? To me, that is a huge red flag. You should definitely check for this before accepting any offer. You don't want to join a company where at the top, they're like, well, I don't know what we're doing. We just have a bunch of people on the bottom figure it out, because that is going to be a mess. So, protect yourselves and make sure that there is a top-down mandate. And when you get in, you can dig into the details of that and connect to it. So all in all, spend the time, understand how and why your role is truly valuable for the company. It's just going to give you good insights to make smart decisions throughout your entire first year. So you're thinking of the scope of your first year, not just doing a bunch of little things in your first 30 days. It's a lot better use of your time than running a little local A/B test or building some dinky feature to get familiar with systems. That stuff you'll just pick up on the job once you're actually getting to the swing of things. All right, last trap I'm going to talk about today is ignoring your instincts. And it sounds very general, but I'll talk about like specifically one of the ways in which this manifests. So ignoring your instincts. Let's say you're following someone else's instructions obediently and without question. You're advancing their project rather than chasing down some kind of nagging feeling you have that something doesn't add up. And this happens as a result. You're going to be wasting a lot of time for yourself and your team, particularly if it's a really costly project. You might end up with a really bad stain on your internal resume, which just kind of messes with your entire tenure at the company. Not to scare you, but why does this happen? Well, one of the really common reasons why this happens is because as a new PM, you're brought in because another PM left and you've come in to inherit that PM's project. So you didn't do anything with that project. You're just picking up someone else's pieces, and those pieces may be wrong. Maybe you are assuming that that predecessor of yours knew exactly what they were doing, but they're leaving for a reason. Maybe they really didn't know what they were doing. Another thing is like maybe you're hired because some really highly paid person has some kind of solution or feature that they want to build, but they didn't do the due diligence to articulate the problem it solves. But they just told your boss, hey, I want someone to build XYZ. Can you hire somebody? And your boss is like, okay, and hired you. So now you're responsible for a thing that actually no one's really done the diligence to understand if it's actually worth building. So another common thing is like, oh, maybe you feel out of place because you're new and you don't really know how to push back. Or you think you lack the data that you actually need to push back effectively. You don't have time to build it. Your boss is like, oh, do this thing. And you're ignoring your instincts and you're just gonna get along and disagree and commit and do it. Or you wanna please your boss. Like maybe he or she took a chance to hire you and you feel like you owe it to your boss to do these things. Or another common one is like this project is already in progress. There's already engineers on it. There's designers that have spent months crafting it. And now you're stepping in. And man, if you were to put the brakes on this thing, even for a little bit, in order to figure out what's going on, people are like sitting around doing nothing. And oh man, you can't do that. The train has already started. That's a fallacy, sunk cost fallacy. Or you lack a better alternative. You feel like, if I want to stop this thing or if I want to do something else, I needed an alternative and I don't have that yet. Because you think taking the wrong action is preferable to taking no action because you think fail fast means it's a safety net to be reckless or something. So the key here is really funny, but think for yourself. Like it or not, you are the directly responsible party now. When the project fails, just saying, hey, I'm new and I was handed the project. Okay, that might work in some companies, but it to me is like a pretty poor excuse because you really should know better. And failing doesn't have to be an inevitable outcome. This is not a Greek tragedy. So you really have three outcomes here. Like you can proceed. If you take a look and everything looks like it looks good and you want to take a chance, you can go and like just inherit a project and keep going. You're the owner now, so its success is really up to you. But I think the more common thing of what people should do is actually delay the project. Apply brakes, buy yourself some time to properly reevaluate the business case, test the hypotheses, get the clarity you need to then be able to more definitively say, I want to resume or I want to end the project. And then option three is, you end the project, you cancel it. Cleanly end the project, lead a postmortem, get to the root of the bad decision if there was a bad decision, maybe from your predecessor. Remember, PMs are hired for their judgment, right? So preventing a poor investment is just as valuable as driving a smart. So let's say you decide to delay and investigate. Well, here, what you're going to want to do is review the market or user research, assuming it exists. I hope it exists. If it didn't, then, it's a good thing you stopped the progress. Look into the opportunity size and the customer problems. Do these actually seem like real problems? Is there evidence of that? Are you solving it at scale? Do the expected outcomes of the project actually connect to team goals and company strategy? Can others on the team explain to you end to end why this project is meaningful without referencing like, oh, so-and-so executive wanted it, so we're doing. So if you had developed the business case from the beginning, would you have arrived at the same conclusion? So you want to rework that problem methodically. First, evaluate the problem space. What is the user problem? What's the company problem? What are developers and partners' problems potentially being faced? User research, does that actually point to it being a problem? Is there market research saying that this problem is actually worth solving? Then you want to explore the solution space. That means, what are all the different ways in which we can address this problem? Do a technical evaluation. Are we going to do a Band-Aid solution, or are we going to do something more long-term that's correct? And what are the implications of that? How might we quickly learn, validate prototypes so that we're not plunging ahead on like a gigantic project and can quickly figure out, are we on the right track or not? So these are things that you should actually just go and redo so that you have the confidence to move forward because now you own it. I think the TLDR here is if it doesn't feel right, take the time to figure out why. That short-term pain of doing a quite quick delay and actually going in and figuring out if you need to change course is going to be preferable than just ignoring your instincts, going heads down, just doing the thing your boss told you to, and then later having to correct a costly mistake. So you might build something and then you have to keep the lights on for the next couple of years. And it's just always going to be a drain on your headcount as you're trying to like actually build things that, 6 months in, you realize are actually valuable. So, don't get roped into doing something kind of silly at the beginning just because you feel like you're new and want to get along. So in summary, I talked about 3 major pitfalls. In summary, being a new PM is super intimidating, especially if you've never been a PM before. Joining any company is intimidating due to all those pressures to perform. And you definitely do want to gather raw facts from the drivers and approvers. But don't assume that all the information you hear is correct. Triangulate from many sources, make your own decision. Do tie the company's product strategy back to your own mandate, but don't over-index on a lot of small early wins. You can always have wins later once you figure out what you're doing. But if you do that too early, you're wasting valuable time. Do resist pressure to deliver something you don't believe in. Maybe you've gotten some kind of, quote, residency project, or your boss wants to make a quick OKR, like to show that you're already like hitting the ground running. Resist that pressure. It's more important to do the due diligence. Don't blindly follow instruction without knowing for yourself that this is worth doing. And that's pretty much it. Well, just want to thank you guys for being a great audience. And you can also feel free to contact me if you have any remaining questions. Thanks.